like to welcome to the stage Rob Palumbo. There's a bunch of different ways we can introduce Rob, but we'll let him come on stage and give a little bit of his background. So Rob, come on up.
One thing that excites us about this conversation as we're here with Rob is, you wear many titles that you're here. One of the reasons we got to know each other is because you run as the co-managing partner of Excel KKR, one of the leading investment firms of the world. You've had a background in investment banking. The roots of that, though, can be traced to your experience in lacrosse, which we'll talk about. And then you're also now one of the owners of the Buffalo Bills. So it's been an interesting journey to think about how all those things maybe connect back together and ultimately led you to the involvement and connection with League Apps. And so maybe we could start and talk about that journey and talk about where it started with your growing up in the world of sports and growing up playing sports. And maybe we'll start there and understand how it shaped how we got on this stage today.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. And I've heard wonderful things about what you all are doing in youth sports, which shaped my career incredibly. It started for me when I was 10 years old, which today I know would be late to start in youth sports, but when I was a youngster, that wasn't late. In the basement of a church, I'll never forget, my father took me to sign up for a soccer league. My father had been drafted to play professional baseball, never played because he had to, make a living. I just remember going out on the soccer field for the first time. I'd never played, and it was just magical. And I'd always watched sports on television and loved that. But as soon as I got on the field and was part of a team, I was hooked. And so growing up, I played all through high school. I was on the basketball team, the lacrosse team, and the soccer team. Prior to that, I had played youth football. And then I actually, when I was going to college, was looking. I played soccer. I got recruited for both, but lacrosse was probably going to be my future. And so, off I went to play lacrosse at Princeton. And lo and behold, my current partner in our business was my teammate at Princeton. And then we worked together, bringing it back to sports. So we worked together at a firm called Alex Brown that worked with technology companies in investment banking, and lo and behold, the CEO was a former lacrosse player from Princeton, and I got an interview through one of my teammates' fathers at Princeton, who happened to work there, and so the journey's just continued, and so I owe a lot to it, and I'm a gym rat at heart. I'm a gym rat.
And I want to maybe explore, but so we'll get back to the Excel KKR story, but. What's your nickname for Tom, your teammate? What's his nickname for you?
Yeah, he's T-Bone, and I guess in the investment world it can be a little formal at times. When I'm in meetings with investors and stuff, I don't care. I just call him T-Bone. So
that's the best. There'll be a meeting of all the portfolio companies. It's like T-Bone, and I'm like, this is amazing.
And he calls me P-Bone. So both nicknames from college. Yeah.
I love that. So if you think back to that college experience where you met now your business partner. What was that experience playing lacrosse at Princeton like? And that you kind of set into motion of what became a dynasty, I think, with Bill Tierney. And so what was that early exposure, not only just to that sports experience and kind of what you learned through sports in terms of the lessons and the impact it had, but also what ultimately you learned about that foundation of what it took to win?
Yeah, so, again, a little bit different era, but when I played lacrosse growing up, I wasn't thinking about, getting a scholarship to playing in college. And in fact, when it came time to choose a college, at that time, Princeton's program was okay, but it wasn't great. And I was being recruited at the top lacrosse programs in the country, several of which went on to win national titles while I was in college. And I made a little bit different choice. I had an older brother who said, you're not going to play lacrosse for the rest of your life. And so I chose to go to Princeton. Little did I know that in the subsequent years that they were going to win national titles. But and it was interesting. So my first 3 years, I had a coach named Jerry Schmidt who was a little past his prime, let's just say. My senior year, I had Bill Tierney, and it was a complete cultural shift. And I've said it to this day. So he previously coached in Rochester, New York, where I grew up before he went to Princeton. They did not have a women's soccer coach. They asked him to coach the soccer team as well as the lacrosse team. He knew nothing about soccer. They wanted Division III national title. When I left Princeton, I wrote him a note and said, I'm a little early, coach, because I know you're going to win a national title. And 3 years later, they did. So, I mean, I learned an immense amount. In fact, in 2 weeks, I'm going up to the Bills-Chiefs game, and him and his wife are coming, and we're going to, introduce him to some of the Bills cognoscenti, and I'm convinced he could coach the Bills. I mean, he's that kind of a leader.
Well, let's see how McDermott does this year.
Exactly. Fingers crossed.
Maybe just a quick follow-up on that. What was it about Bill Tierney that made him so great?
It was culture. It was winning. He was a winner. He was very disciplined. People understood it wasn't personal, and he had their best interests in mind, and he convinced people they could win. And I think that's what was missing. There wasn't a huge gap necessarily with respect to talent, but there was a big gap with respect to having a common vision for where you wanted to take the team and how you're going to get there. And I've had a lot of coaches in my years, and I've never seen anyone better. He could have run a company. I mean, a big company. Just that kind of leadership skills.
So, Rob, we talked a lot yesterday about this newfound kind of investment surge into youth sports. And we also shared how League Apps took capital from your firm, Excel KKR, and our partners yesterday as well. And we know you as a founder and leader of the firm, but Rob is not on our board. And every conversation we've had with Rob over the last year is about one thing: sports. So what else besides talking sports do you do at Excel KKR? And can you give the audience just an overview of the firm and how successful it's been and the size and scale of the organization?
Yeah, so Excel KKR, we started the firm 25 years ago. We invest in purely software businesses like League Apps. And, just as an aside, I mean, when we're looking for businesses, the kinds of businesses we invest in are kind of what we think are market leaders in growing markets with customers who love their product, all of which League Apps has. But I'll never forget, so I'm not on the board, but I'm on the investment committee, and Dean Jacobson, who's on the board with Gordon, who's here, both college athletes, by the way. And I saw Dean, and I haven't told you guys this, but I saw Dean about it, and I said, oh, League Apps looks really interesting, and I love sports. And the first thing Dean said is, oh, great guys, great culture, you're going to love them. Dean didn't talk about profitability or anything else. He talked about the culture at League Apps, which I just thought was really interesting, and it's become pretty evident to me. But in any event, so, we've been investing in software companies for 25 years. We started in the U.S. We now have offices in Europe and in South America. And I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I previously worked in investment banking, but much like many of you, I run a business. It's funny, when I sit down with CEOs, sometimes they view me as someone who is a finance guy, whatever you want to call it. And I always have to remind these folks, no, I'm just an entrepreneur, just like you. And we've had a lot of good fortune, and a lot of it stems from the fact that I think our competitive advantage is our culture. So I'm in an industry where a lot of folks came into it through investment banking. Investment banks generally don't have good cultures. And I was pretty confident early on, given my close relationship with my partner, that if we focused on culture and teamwork, it would be a distinct advantage in an industry that otherwise doesn't have a lot of barriers to entry. And I think it's proven to be the case. I spend, our investors always ask us, how do you spend your time? I spend 50% of my time on the people aspect of the business. And so, look, you're starting to see it, as I understand, private equity are starting to talk to folks like you, which is a sign of the growth of your industry. But and at times the industry does not always have a good reputation. I'm here to tell you I compete against a lot of folks in this industry who are very good people. Like any industry, there's good and there's bad, but there's a lot of good folks in the industry.
Excel Kikera has invested in over hundreds of companies. What do you see as the key aspects of the most successful companies?
Leadership, who's running the business. And I would say, given our good fortune over the years, we generally get the last look at businesses, right? And which is all you can ask for. And where we typically don't get there is where we are talking to a group that has a different set of values and a different view of how you partner. The best, if I look over time, there's been a couple common themes for the companies we've invested in. One is leadership, as I said. Two is the customer that they serve and how happy are they. And I could tell you, we do diligence calls when we're making investments with customers of the potential company we're going to invest in. And, LegalApp's probably got as good a reference from customers as any we've gotten. Now, that also comes out, not to get in the weeds on finance, but, we look at what we call renewal rates. Like when people subscribe to the LegalApp's software, do they renew, right? And if they're renewing, it means it's mission critical to running their business. All the companies we invest in have what we would describe as mission critical software. We also like industries where there's a good tailwind, right? Instead of, fighting, instead of going into the wind, we always want to be going with the wind. And look, youth sports, it's a $70 billion industry. I don't know how fast it's growing. The guys on our investment team certainly do, but you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand, that it's a growing industry with good tailwinds. Those are and lastly, I would just say a cherry on top would be, most of the best businesses are also mission driven and people who have a passion for what they're doing, and they can be profitable, right? But do good as well, not just do well, do good. And when we can find that's like magic, right? That makes it that much more enticing. And most of the businesses we invest in, certainly team apps, there is that. It's someone who started out in industry and saw a problem and figured a way to solve it a little bit better than someone else. And next thing they know, they had a tiger by the tail and they had a business that was growing and they thought they needed some help in the way of capital and a partner. And in those instances, we've done extremely well.
Rob, what has struck us as really neat about our partnership with AKKR is the three board members all are college athletes.
Yeah.
One is a competitive sailor that she reminds me of often. And it's very team-centric.
Yeah.
And, I remember I was speaking when we were in the midst of trying to figure out this partnership. I was talking to Gordon, who you guys heard from yesterday, and I wanted to ask a question to another person on the team, and I didn't know what's the dynamics, and I didn't want to go over his head. And he's like, oh, talk to anybody at the firm. Like, we're all a team. Yeah. And I see that. Sometimes I don't know who to email because it's just like everyone emails everyone at KKR. But would a lot of our partners here believe that they're doing a lot more than teaching sports. Yeah. They're teaching these life skills. Yeah. What are the life skills that you've taken from sports and imbued in AKKR? Because to us, it's very evident.
I think I think the reason we've been successful is because we have a team-oriented culture. And I think it's really hard to do it in our industry, where you get a lot of very successful people, type A personalities, et cetera, et cetera. And my job is to convince them to leave all that at the door when they walk in and become a team player and do the right thing. And in our industry, it's very hard. And I don't think most people are successful at it. As Brian alluded to it. We have a lot of former athletes. We don't recruit for athletes. I think that's just when we interview people, what comes out at the bottom of the funnel tends to be former athletes. Why? Life lessons. It's teamwork, leaving your ego at the door, discipline, and maybe most importantly, as funny as this is going to sound, is persistence. So I'll only spend 20 seconds on that, but this is really interesting. The president of Princeton was in town, and I got together with him. Now, he was meeting with me because he wanted money, I'm sure. So he didn't, he wasn't looking for my advice. But I asked him. I said, well, you get so many applicants. How do you sort of decide? He said, yeah, for every applicant we get 9 students that are qualified. He said, and what we have found to be the common denominator for success is we're looking for people who have been persistent in their past, meaning they've stuck at they've stuck to something, and they keep hammering away at it, and they work at it, and they try to get better at it. I've seen it in our business. Like, you have to be, there's a bar intellectually you have to be over, but after that, the people who are successful at our firm are not necessarily the people with the highest IQs. Lord knows I don't have the highest IQ at the firm, but you keep after it, and you're persistent. And again, I think sports teaches you that. You lose, you get back up. You have a bad season, you keep after it. And so, so much of the way I think about my worldview is just shaped by having played sports.
One thing about the model that you have is to invest and find a business here, and to take and get to the business to a significant scale. And you do that repeatedly over and over again. Yesterday we asked the group and did a quick survey of the 120 organizations that responded. I think something like 80% had a desire to increase the number of kids that they were impacting, the number of families they're impacting. Most wanted to have new facilities, new cities, new locations. So they're in this situation. A lot of them are growing. Some of them are trying to figure out what scale looks like. What have you seen as the repeatable patterns of how organizations scale effectively?
Yeah.
And how is it that you try to influence that scale beyond the kind of capital when you get involved?
Yeah. Many of the businesses we invest in don't, I want to say this right, very smart entrepreneurs, but maybe that's what they've done their whole life, is just work in that particular vertical, and so they don't always know what great looks like, right? And that starts with people. So when we think about how you scale business, first of all, you need to get the right people in the right seats, right? Doing the right things. And talent is always really important to that. Second is just more organizational design and operations. Like, what do you need to run your business? And to be successful, you need to focus on what value you're delivering to your end customer, and everything else you should be outsourcing, right? And that's why we invest in software companies. Their businesses, their core is not software. They're just using our software to automate everything else so that they can focus on, what the customer needs. And, as I understand it, and as I would expect, your business is probably pretty operationally intensive, right? All the small things you need to do to make sure that when the kids get on the field's available, you got the ref, et cetera. And so in order to do that, you should be leveraging not just software, but other tools that allow you to stay kind of true to your core. We try to help our companies do that effectively. Some of our companies are doing M&A. A lot of them are. They've never done that before. How do you do it? How do you integrate a business? How do you integrate cultures? Those are kind of the common building blocks that we see when we invest in companies. Tend to be operators who really know their business, but they're not yet professional managers, and we try to help them professionalize their businesses. I would think your industry is going to be is on that journey, and it's only going to accelerate. And I think what that means for you all is there could be consolidation. There's professional capital that comes in. With that, there's higher expectations from all your stakeholders, not just investors, but I guess your customers, which the parents are going to continue to expect more from you as they do in other industries. And so it's a fun journey to take companies on. I mean, I love what we do. And, you know, I like to say with a lot of this stuff, like, I've seen this movie so many times. Like, what we're seeing happening in youth sports, we've seen it in other industries. And it's exciting. It's really neat.
Maybe just on that, as you think about that journey and influencing it, you know, if you think about those other industries that you've seen that have gone from a place that wasn't as professionalized, now it's professionalizing, what are the different factors? There's technology that may be part of that, but what are the other things that drive the kind of maturation of an industry?
Yeah.
Especially as we're in the early innings of what's happening in the youth sports industry.
The first thing is, truthfully, is capital. Like, when capital, outside professional capital comes into an industry, it accelerates that journey because there's consolidation, because there's more professional management, because there's capital to go out and do the things these businesses need to do to grow. I would say that's probably the number one accelerant. What else will accelerate that journey? I think, truthfully, I honestly think that's one of the key things we see that really sort of changes the trajectory of not just a business, but of an industry.
We're going to switch gears a little bit, and then we'll go to a few Q&A. I don't want my son to run around and with the microphone and get $1 each time, so we have to figure out a different system here. But Rob, you recently became an owner of the Buffalo Bills, and well, I'm sure that's fun for many reasons. I really appreciated how you talked about how influential the Bills are to the culture of the region where you grew up in Rochester and Buffalo. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, everyone wants to buy their, favorite team when they're growing up, right? I'm a big St. John's fan, so, I'm trying to give all my money to Ed to get better players. So that's what happens to the transaction fees and league apps. But can you talk about the Bills, what it means to you, as you think about culture and how that translates from, looking at it now when you have a view of it in a professional football team? Yeah,
so like I'm sure many of you, since the time I was 4 or 5 years old, like, the Buffalo Bills for me it's what brought our family together. And it's a part of the country, if you're from upstate New York, if any of you are, it's economically depressed. It's the Rust Belt. And it really and truly is the thing that brings that community together. And so one night I'm home, and I have an older brother, my best friend. We're really close. We talk about the Bills all the time. I mean, it's like, it's what we do. I got texts on it this morning. Josh Allen is hurt. My brother sent me a note. He's probably going to be good because they have a bye week, but Josh is a little banged up. Anyways, I get a call from him one night, and he's in a bar. I'm like, what are you doing? He says, listen to this, and he kind of turns the telephone, his phone to the sports channel that was on. It was a sports bar that the Bills were selling an interest. So the next morning, I kind of figure out who the investment banker is. I call him up. I'm like, here in New York City. I said, you don't know me. His name was Steve. I said, Steve, you're not going to be the bigger fan. I need to meet you. So I came down and met with met with Steve, and he said, go see Terry. So to your point about, the Bills and what they mean to a community. So I go down and see Terry Pagula, who's the owner, and I walk in and we start talking, and I said, he bought the team in 2014. At the time, they were probably going to move out of town. There was a group called Rogers that was going to take it up to Toronto. There were other folks who were going to take it to a more lucrative, quote-unquote, market. And so he bought it in 2014. Before the first game, he goes out to midfield to just say a few words, and the place is going bananas. And I told Terry, I said, Terry, I remember when I was watching that on television, I had goosebumps. I had goosebumps. And the reason I had goosebumps was not because I thought you were going to bring us a world championship. I said, because I understood why all those people were cheering. They weren't cheering about that. They were cheering because you saved this community. If this team leaves, there's going to be tumbleweeds through downtown. And I really believe that. And so when I invested in the Bills, it was more. It's to me, it's just much more than a football team, right? In part, it's a community service. It's a way of giving back, as corny or crazy as that might sound. And for a lot of professional teams, that's not the case. If you're the Dallas Cowboys, Dallas will do just fine if they don't have the Cowboys. But if the Buffalo Bills aren't in Buffalo, there's no Buffalo, there's no Rochester. And so it had real meaning to me. And the other thing, when I met them, the thing they talked about was culture. So when Terry came in, the team hadn't won in years. I mean, it'd been brutal. And he brought in a new GM, he brought in a new coach, and what do they preach? They preach culture. And it's interesting, I was talking to Brandon Beans, the GM, and some of those folks, and they talking about their algorithm, if you will, for how they scout talent. And part of their algorithm is not the measurables, which are all important, but it's, the kind of person they're looking for, and will it fit the culture. And I just heard all that, and it just resonated with me, and I was sold. And so it's been a lot of fun.
I just can't wait for League Eps to see such a milestone that we just jump on a table.
A card table.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I
think we have time maybe for one or two questions. And one thing I'll also point out is Rob has a connection to the youth sports industry. I think you're an investor.
I am.
Besides with League Eps.
I'm an investor in Trilogy Lacrosse. So, Ryan Boyle played lacrosse at Princeton, and he was looking to raise some money to get his venture off the ground, and I'm delighted to be involved. It's great.
All right, we have time for maybe one or two questions. Any questions for Rob? Don't be shy. Yes, microphone maybe back there. It's coming your way.
Greg Bites, Red Lacrosse. I know Ryan. Boyle's man. Anyways, my question is, for you, do you have any recommendations on books, podcasts, anything that you've read that's been influential for leadership?
Yeah, there's a book. It's not about sports, but I think it's very. Jim Collins wrote a book. Anybody ever heard of a book called Good to Great? It's what Tom and I read. It's a great book. I actually don't read business books. I'm a history major, so I read a lot of history. But I have read that one.
You talked about how you try and take like type A personalities or people that are very successful in their own rights and kind of rein them in to focus on one vision. What's something that has been probably like the most impactful point in that journey, I guess, that you've seen like a common denominator that like this is the thing that helps
Rally people, you mean?
Kind of corralling them to connect on a vision when they're probably used to executing on their own vision.
It's a good question. I think you can't just talk the talk. You kind of got to walk the walk. And what I mean by that is we talk about all these things at our firm, but then the way we run our business and the way we conduct ourselves is consistent with that. And so, we do a team meeting every 2 weeks for everyone at the firm. We give updates on the market and all this other stuff. And then we do this thing called shout-outs, right? And it's to point out people that went above and beyond to be a good team player. And it's not the big stuff. It's the little stuff. When we think about the way we compensate people, it's a part of the way we think about compensation, that people are doing the right thing, right? For people who've been at the firm around, they have equity in all the different businesses we own, so that even if it's not a business they're involved with, when something good happens and there's an opportunity, and we get cash back, they participate, right? And so you have to kind of align not your vision and values with kind of how you run your firm, right? So it's all of a piece, because otherwise I think it's hollow. I think it's kind of hollow to say, yeah, we're a team, but then you don't really act that way. And I will tell you this, last thing I would just say is, I've always said that there's an expression that a fish rots from the head down. And so it starts at the top. Me and my partner happen to be good friends, and we trust each other. And people, if you're in an you see that, and you mimic that behavior. And I think if we didn't have that kind of a dynamic, I think it'd be harder to have this kind of a culture.
Can you guys stand up and explain what you're doing to Rob? Because we were talking about lacrosse this morning and how it's getting into new markets, and I enjoyed our conversation at the end of the day yesterday. So this is your chance to tell everybody here.
How's it going, y'all? I'm Joseph Ngowen. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I started playing lacrosse when I was 6 years old. Absolutely fell in love with it. Oh, thank you very much. So we own a company called Athlete Classroom. Our company is based on the principles of essentially allowing athletes that typically would have their identity inside athletics, which was very true to myself. Absolutely in love with the sport to the point where I would literally rather die than not play lacrosse. And that kind of came to fruition in Ireland, where we met at the U21 World Championships. I play for the Uganda Olympic/national team. He plays for Puerto Rico. One of our other partners plays for Ireland. I tore my ACL, MCL, meniscus, and fractured my kneecap all at once, and I got back up, went back in the game, and scored a goal after because I didn't care. That experience and kind of my entire life journey, and Nelson's as well, of having our identity in our performance on the field, I think is something that a lot of athletes can resonate with. And we wanted to give an opportunity for athletes to learn about the impact that they can make using their status as an athlete to improve themselves, their character, the impact that they can make on the world, as well as building a resume. Because we also noticed that throughout high school and college, if you want to play at the highest level, you're not going to be working jobs during the summer. You're going to be playing club ball. You're going to be traveling. You're going to be playing Division I. You're going to be studying. And so when you leave high school and college, you almost had no opportunity to find your identity in anything outside of the sport that you are being pushed to be massively successful in. And so our company, Athlete Classroom, we started a club program called Inspire Success Early. It raises money and awareness for breast cancer specifically through our partnership with 501c3 Headstrong Foundation. And this past year was our first year as a program, and our kids raised over $50,000 for cancer patients through the power of social media. So in lacrosse, in lacrosse specifically, I think our sport is very tied to, if you play lacrosse, you watch lacrosse, but if you don't play lacrosse, you don't care about lacrosse. And we wanted to change that narrative and make lacrosse more accessible to people like ourselves who aren't the typical lacrosse players. I was on the first ever program in my city. And Nelson, I'll kind of let him share his story as well, but we don't look exactly like a typical lacrosse player. And we wanted to change that, and the only way to change that is to make it more accessible, make it fun, and kind of change things, change the culture, and give, not just, like you said, walk the walk, not just talk the talk, but make things that we would have loved as kids. And one of the things that I think is our biggest advantage is we're really close friends as well, so it's awesome to hear that. And I don't know if are you related to Chad Palumbo?
No, Chad Palumbo plays lacrosse at Princeton. Yeah,
so,
no relation.
Okay. So yeah, we were wondering that. But actually, so one of our we just had our first 5-star recruit, and he's committed to Princeton. So I'd love to connect to you
cool.
guys. But I'll let Nelson kind of take it from here and explain anything I missed.
Yeah, I'm Nelson Telemaco. So I also tore my ACL playing lacrosse too, and we kind of found that by putting our identity in lacrosse, like if you put your identity in the sport, you put your identity in anything, whether that's your sport or your job or your business or anything like that, when that thing gets taken away from you, it's like, what do you do from there? So something that my family always kind of preached to me was to always do everything I do with excellence, and that was something that was like, okay, if I'm not going to do lacrosse with excellence, because I literally can't, I got to find something else to be excellent at and continue to drive. And that was something that kind of Joseph and I saw in each other, where I have a production background. I work with a lot of companies from a media marketing perspective, developing campaigns, and doing it really from a corporate professional perspective, where Joseph comes from a more organic social media view. And by kind of combining forces and using what we learned, we're like, why can't we inspire young athletes to do what we're doing? Because we're not really like that special in any type of case. We just have a willingness to act, and that was something that we've even seen some of our kids like go and try and start businesses, and they're like 14 years old. So, you know, it's been really cool to see, and I think that's why we're kind of really diving into the youth sports world. And League Apps was super, like, it was awesome to be invited by Kevin, who we just signed on to League Apps to try and take our business to the next level. And I think being able to be in a room with like all of you guys and get different perspectives of kind of like what Rob was saying, like, you know, we're young, so we want to learn from all you guys in terms of like how to develop those cultures and see what you guys have been doing, but also want to offer insights to all of you guys in terms of like we're boots on the ground. Like, we've done everything we've done because we've been grinding for like 5 years, like literally just connecting with these kids, understanding what they want, what their families want and need. And I think that's why we've been able to grow so fast. You don't really, you know, 5x your program size in the first year unless you really understand your consumer base. So we want to be able to help you guys with that, and then any insight you guys have for us, we'd appreciate it as well as we try and grow.
Well, I just want to acknowledge, first of all, round of applause. That's amazing. And the one thing I'll say to go full circle is maybe some of the kids in your program are going to end up becoming partners at an investment firm that they found together and then invest in youth sports to help everyone else in the room. So thank you very much. And also want to thank Rob. I think it's neat to see full circle what happens when it starts with youth sports and what are the stories and places to go. We're certainly honored to have the partnership with Excel KKR. And one thing I think we've learned is everyone out here is considering capital and whatnot is find investors that match your culture and values, because that's going to be more important than any check or anything else or any strategy. We certainly found that in our partnership. So a round of applause for Rob Colombo. I appreciate that. And then we have one final special announcement with this idea of how do we spread more